So, pivotal learning moments. So in the same way that I've journaled things over and over again and made YouTube videos on topics over and over again, a lot of the important things to stick with us are because we remind ourselves of it over and over again. Life continually delivers us the same lessons over and over again, whether or not we accept them. Accepting them, I think, just brings more grace into our lives because we decide to work with them instead of against them. Like the idea of fitting in versus standing out, which is what this Happiness is a Choice Shay Carl shirt represents with this yellow triangle. So I had known about the idea of too much of a good thing is a bad thing indeed for a while, from college, from just having to balance things in life. In this reading journal I have on November 14th, 2014, I read David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell. The story of how David beats Goliath by completely changing the rules of combat, right, by using a sling and a stone instead of like a sword or a club, whatever Goliath had, has stuck with me for so long. Because the idea of setting rules for games, setting context, having centers, having prioritized values, it's really stuck with me on this inverted U-curve idea, which really began long ago when I learned about the iceberg image, right? You only see so much of the iceberg, you see a small percentage of it on the surface of the water, and the majority of it is below the water. Things are more complicated than they appear, and the closer you look, the more nuanced it gets. Which is classic, right? Which makes sense. This idea of extremes on both sides, of the extreme high and the extreme low, thinking about how in life an extreme advantage has disadvantages and advantages, and an extreme disadvantage has advantages and disadvantages. It makes the idea of enough a much more interesting approach to something. The idea that more is always better and less is always bad. Being a big fish in a little pond versus a little fish in a big pond. Or being a big fish in a big pond and a little fish in a little pond. It's this balance between inconvenience and convenience, have to and get to. And then the other idea to think about a lot from this, which is kind of a comforting idea, is that even evil has its limits. Dark cannot overcome all of light, and light cannot overcome all of dark, since they imply each other. They're both connected. So let me talk about this inverted U-curve a little bit and what stuck with me. Ooh, check it out! This image, the image of this thing. U-curve, bell curve, like standard deviation. This is like a breath, right? Breathe in, capacity for your lungs, full of oxygen, breathe out. I want to do like more of a parabola. It's an interesting dynamic. So another way to think about this, and this is what I'm going to get into with the whole advantages, disadvantages thing to start off. Think of all or nothing thinking too. Think of like this as all or nothing. Because what they share in common is this kind of resistance and denial. This side denies the existence of the other side, and this side denies the existence of the other side. A crest and trough in a wave, you can't have this side without that one. Ideally, enough should be somewhere in here, right? Or down here. I mean, I guess it depends on a lot. If your circumstances, if you have enough food, then you shouldn't have to be all the way here, right? Take a factor and try it out yourself. But if you have an environment with little food... Okay, but let me throw it on its head. What about this factor, caring about things? In terms of this topic, this and this both have the same element, which is kind of like a desperation, sort of, right? Or something in an extreme, some kind of resistance. Those are really like the two elements that are at work here. I see them as different things. Doing this too much is unhealthy. It's resistance to not knowing. And then doing this too much, apathy. You're resisting what is. I mean, obviously, right, it depends on what you're caring about or worrying about for this dynamic. Enough is, to me, a more interesting thing to figure out. You can't control everything. And if you don't pay attention to anything at all, none of these will be graceful in life. The virtue between the vices. So there's sincerity. If this is enough, whatever you think the virtue is, attachment to too much is against the letting go, non-attachment up here. And then this, what's that? Attachment to nothing. You're still resisting something, but you're resisting what you attach to that could be healthy. This is kind of like apathy. This is not giving any. Don't care about anything. It's not graceful. But if you care about too much and try to get everything in your control, it's also unrealistic. So there's a desperation to these two qualities that don't match this. I talk all the time about taking things too seriously. This becomes serious, I mean, depending on the topic. This also becomes serious. They both become desperate. And then this up here, sincere. When you're here, let's say this is you. When you're here and you have two extremes on either end, which way are you supposed to incline? Obviously that depends on what the subject is. Again, let's say there's all this pressure from life hitting you from this direction that's causing you to go this way, and you have to incline against the wind that way to prevent yourself from being pushed down this extreme. There's a quote by Seth Godin. He says, "We live in the middle and we understand at the edges." Humans are kind of grouped together by their rough edges in ways. And out of many leadership images, or one, come many. I found another good word, right? This is indifference, and this is neediness. Or how about this one, right? Trust in high amounts. Everything, almost to the point of being naive, and then completely closed off and trusting nothing. Where is the happy medium in that? It's often not so much where you end up on this. It's more often what you use with the amount that you have at that spot. Like, for example, technology, right? Here's the extreme of ignoring tech, which seems impossible because our society is so ingrained in technology now. You've got to know how to use stuff to prosper. Here's completely addicted to technology to the point that it's a hindrance. Where are we supposed to be? This sort of represents a system of thinking. The system is flawed. No effort, and this is insane effort. But the system doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter how much effort you put into it if the rules don't make sense. So yeah, that's the inverted U-curve. It doesn't solve everything. It is something you can use to create balance, I guess, and a better context and lens for seeing things. This has been brought to you by Polka Dots, where I talk about leadership images all the time. Images and how we can use them to create better systems and context. Life is so much prioritization and so much balance. Thanks for sticking with me again. I hope this helped you out in some way. It has for me. This is just one image. We will see you tomorrow, Tim, with Thoughts from Places. Keep being you, and DFTBA.